tell you how privileged we are to have these two folks come speak with us. These are national folks who are speaking to groups all over the country, and they're speaking about cutting-edge research and the relationship of trauma to criminal behavior to other things of that sort. But what I wanted to do first, from some of the research I've done, and some of that has been with Joan's work as well, is to set the framework. Why we are looking at trauma, why we look at shame, and the relationship between addiction, criminal behavior, and childhood trauma. So I'm going to do a real brief overview of this, and then introduce Joan and then William. So we have known AVP has been successful. We have the research to back it up. We have not known why, not until recently. There was a study done in California called the ACEs study by the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And this is a major study of 17,000 folks in Southern California. And they looked at childhood trauma. And Joan's going to talk more about this. They looked at childhood trauma and the relationship to future behavior. Okay? And what they found is there's a direct correlation that if you had, one ACE is one type of childhood trauma, whether you experienced your parent being killed, whether there was an alcoholic in the family, whether someone in your family went to prison, etc. And this is a middle-class group. 47% had graduated from college. 74%, something like that, I guess it's close to that, had gone to college. Okay? So it's a middle-class, 50% white, and these are the results, that it is a 510% chance if you had 5 ACEs, 5 different types of childhood trauma, of having domestic violence, of being raped, an 890% chance you would be raped. All the way down to attempted suicide, 1,680% chance, as opposed to the normal population. Okay? So you see there is a direct correlation. Okay? Now, how does this work? This works because you get an early childhood trauma, then there are predictable developments of the brain. And I'll show you a physical example of this. The brain develops differently, okay? And I'll explain that in a second. That results in diminished IQ, slower language and reading ability, so you can imagine what kind of an impact that has in school. ADHD, ADD, attention problems, and then also aggressive behavior, social isolation, and conflict. So this starts happening in school. The end result is that you start avoiding, you start using of drugs, alcohol, etc., or sex at an earlier age, much earlier age. That can result in suspension from school, school failure, I think I got this, yeah, there's school failure, dropping out because of academic problems, or because of behavioral problems, expulsion, dropping out, delinquency, etc. The result, low-wage jobs, unemployment, public assistance, prison, chronic health problems, debilitating mental health. There is a direct correlation between the childhood trauma to these behaviors. Now, this is a middle-class neighborhood. What about the inner city? Do you think there's a little bit higher percentage of experiencing trauma if you're raised in the inner city? Okay, so the impact, this really hit me hard. This is a normal brain of an 11-year-old child, or a child that was not traumatized. This is a child that was traumatized, not physically. This is emotionally, sexually, some other way, but it was not physical trauma. So you cannot say the physical trauma on the brain, resulted in this. What do you notice? Several things of significance. One, the brain is smaller. You see that? See this white around here? Less white. The brain is smaller. The brain. No, just the
gray matter.
The cortex is the brain parts, whatever you want to call it, the brain parts. Close enough. And you see that there's a different development there, physical development. And then also very significantly, look at the brainstem here. as opposed to the brainstem there. And our brainstem is our fight or flight. And it's a non-rational, non-logical, something happens, the saber-toothed tiger is coming, and you're not thinking logically, now let's see, where should I go, what should I do? You just simply go, okay? So there is childhood trauma affects the development, the structure, and the function of the brain. So that people are behaving not because they don't want to, because it's irrational, it's because they have no choice. Okay, what's the prevalence? Delaware is a trauma-informed state. It's one of 8 trauma-informed states right now. And Joan has come and done some work with us and some other folks that's really helped the Department of Substance Abuse and Mental Health to be trauma-informed in their care. And they have found that 85%, and I was told a few weeks ago, this is conservative, 85% of those folks that come to the state mental health and substance abuse programs have significant childhood trauma. And in prison, what percent do you think of the women have had childhood trauma? If it's less than 95, I would be surprised. And the men is very high as well, 80, 85, something like that. I've not seen substantial research on either of those, but that I think we can agree is pretty true. So we now have, because of this research, we have a new understanding of addiction. Folletti, who was Vincent Folletti, who was one of the co-investigators in the ACEs study, along with Robert Andel. Robert Andel. He says that the basic cause of addiction is predominantly experience-driven during childhood and not substance-dependent. So you may become dependent on gambling, on sex, on power, I believe, on alcohol. It does not matter. That's just the symptom. That's just the vehicle you use. It is a chronic brain disease. And if you're just trying to treat somebody with alcohol and drug and say, well, just stop drinking, that's not the cause. That's not the issue. That's just the vehicle or the symptom. So the American Society of Addiction of Medicine, which is the physicians that are involved with addiction, have said that addiction is a chronic brain disorder and not simply a behavioral problem involving too much alcohol, drugs, gambling, or sex. It affects your management, your mental management ability. And it is simply put, addiction is not a choice. Addictive behaviors are a manifestation of a disease, not a cause. So this was last August that they came up with this. This is recent stuff. So drug programs are now beginning to look more and more in trauma and the relationship. So when someone experiences trauma, if they have a sense of community, a sense of connection, they can heal from that trauma. If they don't, then they tend to isolate, go within, and disconnect from others. And when they disconnect from others, they're also disconnecting from themselves. Think about that in terms of AVP and what we do. And you see how powerful what we do is and how important what we do. So it creates the shame, and the shame, well, it was already spoken. Terry was talking about, or no, Roger was talking about preventing violence in James Gilligan. James Gilligan, who's a psychiatrist, the head of the program at Massachusetts DOC, and also related, I think, with Harvard at the time, he said there are 3 conditions for violent behavior. Shame is a necessary but insufficient condition. Lack of empathy, lack of awareness of alternative behaviors. Do I see AVP in there? I mean, AVP, oh, and then I'm going to come back to that. I meant to take that out, but anyway. Joan's going to talk about trauma-informed care, where the people who are providing care, whatever the care is, don't re-traumatize. You got that? And that's especially true in corrections, where that is the main course of the day. How can we re-traumatize these people into submission? And what was it someone said? I know I'm going over my 10 minutes, but I apologize. That shaming someone who feels shame, like shaming an addict, is the same thing as giving salt water to someone who's dying of thirst, dying of thirst, dehydration. It sounds like a good idea, you're giving them water, but it's exactly the wrong thing, and it'll make it worse because of the salt, which is a diuretic. Case example, William's going to talk about his specific example in a minute, but there's another person I'll do real quickly. This is Tonair Kane. 80 some odd times arrested, 66 times convicted, 40 times in and out of prison, from Annapolis, lived under a bridge for a number of years, and she often goes around with Joan talking with folks. Am I doing what you were going to do? Oh, okay. This was her, the Annapolis Police Department. If you saw this gal come up to you, what would you think? Look at her now. Wow. Someone named Joan Gleese, instead of saying, "What did you do now, Kane? What did you do now?" She, for the first person, was said, "What happened to you?" Once she said, "What happened to you?" and could take a look at the trauma, then she didn't need these escape behaviors, these mechanisms, this avoidance. She didn't need that. Powerful, powerful stuff. Okay, AVP I look at as cognitive emotional restructuring, because we literally do new pathways into the brain. And it's emotional, not just cognitive. When you create respect and caring, that creates safety. Safety builds trust. Trust allows openness. Openness leads to awareness. Awareness is transformational. We give people a sense of hope that comes from within them, and a positive attitude. If you have a negative attitude and you're looking for negative stuff, what are you going to find? If you have a positive attitude and you look for positive stuff, you're much more likely to have positive things happen. And when negative things happen, if you can look at it positively, you can grow from that. So back to Gilligan. He said shame is a necessary but insufficient condition, lack of empathy, etc. What do we do in AVP? With shame, we treat shame by validation, connection, and community building. If these folks had had that when they experienced the trauma, they would very likely not have had shame as a result of that. Empathy, by self-awareness, I look at intimacy as into me see. You got that? Yeah. Intimacy, into me see. I cannot be intimate with you unless I can see myself. And when people see themselves through AVP, they usually like what they find. Much better than what they have been protecting. So then we teach through experiential learning alternatives, etc. I can give this if people, you don't need to write down, I can give it to you later if you want. Oh. So, sorry. Some of this stuff I put on the AVP list, but I'm glad to put this PowerPoint on. In fact, it's a 45-minute PowerPoint. Now I'm going to shut up. Briefly, real briefly, two more things. A metaphor. Trauma is like boulders in a stream. It totally rocks and changes your life and messes you up. You get high and dry. It is just so messing up your life. I can't think of the word. What does AVP do? AVP doesn't directly deal with the trauma, but we deal with the impact of trauma. So we raise the water level. So the stones are still there, but you're now able to go down the river. You're able to function down. And if you do trauma healing and do more work on yourself, then you actually can end up with a much very smoother ride. But that's what AVP does. It raises the water level so you can function in life. Risk factors for reoffending. This is coming out of the criminal justice system. Attitude, peers, personality, employment, family, substance abuse, and so on. Do you see AVP up there? And by the way, they say that unless you deal with these top three, the rest does not matter. Unless you deal with attitude and personality, which has to do with partly with interpersonal skills. What do we do, folks? We deal with attitude and personality, and when you deal with that, it impacts their peers. Because they say, these are not the peers I want to be with. Okay? So, that was just to give a context of why trauma healing, shame healing is also important to AVP. And why, Joan and William are here. Joan Gillespie. Yeah, I was going to say William Gillespie, and that's, someone must be that. It's Joan Gillespie, my apologies, Joan. Joan is the director of the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care and the National Technical Assistance Center to promote trauma-informed practices and alternatives to seclusion and restraint. And much of that happens in the mental health issue, in mental health system. So she is the national director of that. She has 30 years of experience in the behavioral health field, 15 dedicated to trauma, and 6 in preventing seclusions and restraints, which would be trauma-informed care. She has worked with different kinds of agencies with juvenile and adult corrections, and she's also been published in the American Correctional Association, in a very good article, on introducing trauma-informed care into prisons and jails. And William Gillespie is a survivor of trauma. William Killebrew. Your names I know, somehow Gillespie gets in there. William Killebrew is a survivor of childhood trauma. Would you rather meet just a little bit? He experienced his mother's murder when he was 10 years old, and his brother also being seriously injured and suffering greatly. And in his family, there's been criminal behavior, prison time, drug addiction, attempted suicide, etc., probably as a direct result of their experiencing that. He received I hadn't heard this before, but the Champion of Change from the White House Award. And he's been on Oprah with Bill Cosby. So his life has changed quite dramatically. So as I said before, folks, we are really, really honored to have Joan Gillespie and William Killebrew here today. So let's welcome Joan.